It's been a long time since I've seen you. You don't have too much time to tell us all about it, but all I can put out there on record that IIan came to India. He didn't meet me. He was a few kilometers away from me. So that is a bit of an issue.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
A little bit about yourself, and let's go into
Okay.
the topic. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Vikram. Such an honor to be here and amongst this great group of mediators. So thank you very much for the invitation, and yeah, really appreciate everything that you're doing to develop the field of mediation. So thank you for that as well. Okay, should I maybe share my presentation?
Please.
Yeah.
Please,
Okay.
please. You
Okay.
want to, of course, you are going to tell us about yourself also. Part of
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Right.
Perfect.
So let me do this. Okay.
Because what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to take time because there is short of time. So I'll just normally put up my website. I won't put it up. Mediatorvikram.com. You find information there and all that. So I won't get into all that. Yeah, please.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Vikram. Right. So you can see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm going to do a few slides. I thought it was an hour, but never mind. We'll go quickly. So, okay. A little bit of a table of contents there. So we're going to talk a little bit about language and mediation, conflict resolution and mediation, non-violence. Of course, I came back from India recently, and mediation as language, and then future of mediation. So let's see how much of that we can actually get through. So I mean, you probably noticed that it's got some Chinese characters there. So obviously I'm a Mandarin speaker, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. So a bit about me. So this is sort of like a timeline of my, life, education, professional developments. So I'll just explain a little bit. So I am a British Israeli dual national. I was born in Israel, in the Tel Aviv area. My parents are from London. We're a Jewish family, of course, secular Jewish family. So they were living in Israel when I was born. So that they wanted me to be born there, I think especially my dad. But we came back to the UK when I was very young, a baby still. And I grew up my whole life in London. When I had the chance, my education. So I went to a Church of England primary school. So essentially a state faith school. Of the Church of England, branch of Christianity. And I went to a Jewish secondary school from the age of 11. So I had a kind of mixed educational background. I mean, really great educational background, but mixed. And I think that's kind of important because it gives me maybe a little bit more of a diverse perspective on, from a very young age. But you can see the timeline here. So I went to University of Sheffield. I did East Asian studies. I was actually enrolled to do economics and ended up changing pretty much off the back of a trip to Japan that I found very interesting. My first job out of university was working for an American bank. At that time, I did some Chinese Mandarin studies. I wanted to build upon my degree studies and eventually go and live in China, which I did in 2009. So you can see here, I went out to Beijing. I was teaching English and also learning Mandarin at Tsinghua University. While I was there, I found a job working for the British Embassy. I'm doing immigration work, so helping Chinese people to come and visit the UK for various different reasons. And I did that for a couple of years, at which point I made the decision to move to Israel. I'd never lived there before and hadn't even visited many times. But of course, being born there, I wanted to have that experience. And I chose a master's program in Israel called Public Policy, Conflict Resolution, and Mediation. So they were looking at policy, government policy, specifically in relation to Israel's sort of relationship with Palestinians and with other Arab nations in the region. I lived in Israel for a few years and got involved in a little bit of peace building work while I was there, sort of youth peace building, education, that kind of thing. At which time I had a good opportunity to move back to Beijing. I did that in 2017 and worked for the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank as an administrative officer, so doing travel and security management for the bank. I was only there for a year, and I came back to the UK, and I was sort of, figuring out what to do next. And I think it was my sister who said, well, why don't you do some volunteer work in the community? I was staying with my sister in the city of Brighton and Hove, which is where I'm currently based. So I've come back to the UK after 13 years abroad. And I volunteered with the Brighton and Hove Independent Mediation Service, a community mediation service that is a charity. It's funded by the local government, so Brighton and Hove City Council, and also the Sussex Police, the two main donors of the organization. And I'm still actually involved with them to this day. And I'm actually working on a community mediation for them right at this very time that does not involve neighbors. So it's actually, I obviously can't say much about it, but it's a dispute essentially within a particular minority community based in Brighton and Hove. So I'm working on that right now. But I came back only for a few months, and then I had another opportunity to go back to China, and I did that. And actually, when I went there, because I'd sort of been on my conflict resolution journey since I graduated in 2014 and done some training of postgraduate students in mediation skills, I started to sort of network as a mediator in China, in Shanghai, in sort of late 2018 to 2019. Of course, then COVID came, and I was forced essentially to slowly go back. I was actually outside of China. I went to Israel to deliver a mediation workshop for the graduate students at Tel Aviv University, where I did my master's program, and I couldn't get back to China. So I sort of, stayed in Israel for a few months. Then I moved to Italy for just over a year because my mum lives there. And I think, Vikram, that's where we did our last session, Conversation with a Beautiful Mind. I think that was April 2021, if I'm not mistaken. So almost 2 years since that. So time flies. And so since then, I've been on, sort of like my developing myself as a mediator journey. So I'm a consultant with TCM Group. I also am a peace builder with Mediators Beyond Borders International, and helping them to set up their European chapter. And I've actually, set up my own practice, which I call Orchid Mediation. Still deciding if that's a good name or not, but that's what I called myself for the time being. So that's me. A little bit about me, and just a bit about languages as well. So I'm a native English speaker, of course, and I speak one other language very well, which is Mandarin, the sort of the main dialect of the Chinese family of dialects, you could say. And then I sort of have a few other languages which I'm not particularly good at. So of course, Hebrew, I learned when I was at school at the age of 11 in London. I did a bit of Hebrew study when I went to do my master's degree, but I can read it, but it's still at a pretty low level. I learned French at school after I stopped learning Hebrew at school. So I took up French. I learned some Japanese when I was at Sheffield. I started off studying Japanese before Chinese, in fact. So, my Japanese was good at that time, but is now terrible. And then recently I've been studying a little bit of Italian because, of course I lived there, and, when you live somewhere, you want to learn the language and make an effort to fit in. So that's me.
Yeah.
So language and me. Yeah.
Let me just put it out there that if
Yeah.
people go to YouTube, they can just search Mediator Vikram and Ilan Bas, and they'll find that episode of In Conversation with a Beautiful Mind, where there was a nice long conversation. You'll get to know more about him. Yes, yeah. Ilan, please.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Vikram. So, yeah, language and mediation. I mean, I was kind of worried about talking about this because, I'm not an academic. I don't come at it from any particular sort of like, I suppose, of course, I studied conflict resolution and mediation, at an academic level, and that's sort of my foray into the field. But, in terms of language, I just happen to have learned, Mandarin in my life. So I'm definitely not an expert on this topic. But, of course, the role of language in mediation is crucial, right? I mean, it's as a mediator, you have to be very finely attuned to both your own language that you're using at the mediation table, and also, of course, the language of the parties that you're mediating between. So, it's crucial. And in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about some concepts that we can use to improve our ability to be mediators, but also as ordinary people, communication techniques that we can use to go about our lives and have better relationships with people, and to build more peace in general in our communities. So actually I had this kind of like opening monologue that I sort of typed out, and actually I'm going to be honest in that I used ChatGPT to create it, so I'm not going to read it out because I think we're very short on time, but the point was that it was actually really good. I tell you what, I'll read you the conclusion. In conclusion, language is a critical and complex element in mediation, particularly in cross-cultural and international mediations. As a mediator who's lived in 4 countries and speaks Mandarin, I've learned that active listening, neutral and respectful language, careful use of interpreters, and the power of language to foster creativity and innovation are essential skills and tools for effective mediation. I hope that my perspectives have been helpful, and look forward to continuing the discussion on language and mediation. So a computer wrote that. It's pretty great, but I just typed a few words in and it gave me. So I was going to come back at the end and surprise everyone, and talk about the role of technology in mediation. But anyway, I've kind of given it away now, but we don't have the time. So I want to come on to the concept of conflict resolution, because for me, this is where my journey into mediation starts. And it's quite important that I make that definition, or distinction rather. So of course, I'm not a lawyer. I didn't study law. I'm not a psychologist. My career, if you can call it a career, is very mixed and diverse. I've worked in banking. I've worked in government. I've worked for NGOs and international organizations. I've worked for universities. So it's been very non-linear. Let's just put it that way. And so this is where my journey into mediation starts. It starts with conflict resolution and the studies that I undertook at Tel Aviv University in Israel. So the reason why I'm starting here is because I think it's important for people to understand that for me, mediation is part of a broader academic discipline, and also potentially quite a rapidly evolving professional, let's say, professional discipline or a profession of conflict resolution, which, I think, Vikram, you and I might agree that is, perhaps, misunderstood or underrated or undervalued, and what we're doing here is trying to spread the good word about conflict resolution and mediation. But I like this. I took this from Wikipedia. I think it's just helpful for people to understand where mediation sort of sits on a spectrum of conflict resolution. So you can see here you've got unassisted negotiation all the way on the left with a high degree of personal control, and then you've got war all the way on the other side of the spectrum with a low degree of personal control. And litigation and arbitration are really much more further up the scale towards war, although they're quite different from war, than mediation is, which is sort of somewhere on the left side where you have a higher degree of personal control. So just thought that was important. Now, mediation, look, I've watched some of the presentations, and so I don't want to go over this too much because, I watched Michael Lang, that was wonderful. I watched Elyse Salley, I think it was, and she was also great on the nonverbal communication bit, which I'm going to come to a bit later. And I also watched Amanda Bucklow's presentation, and just wanted to shout out for Brighton and Hove based mediators. We live not too far from each other, so we did go for a coffee a few months ago. Anyway, I don't want to go into too much of this because I think everybody probably knows what mediation is by now, but I've just put some simple stuff on there. Voluntary, confidential, impartial, the big 3. I suppose you could add neutrality to that, but I think Michael Lang did a fantastic job of explaining that. And some tools down here as well, which I want to get more into the tools section. Okay, maybe I'll add a bit of context. I mean, look, mediation's been around since humans have been around, right? The neutral third party who gets who intervenes proactively into people's conflicts and disputes and disagreements. This is the work which has helped us to live in more peaceful communities. And I think it's kind of, we're on that path of it being more sort of, professionalized and developing it as its own profession. The reason why I love it is because it's collaborative and creative and can be very transformative. And as far as I'm concerned, is a much more modern way of resolving disputes between humans than many other forms of dispute resolution. Certainly, I would argue litigation. I think that mediation can be much more effective on many different levels than litigation. So, key skills: listening, reflective listening, non-judgment, empathy, effective questioning, reframing. I'm going to come to some of these a little bit in a minute. Mediation is very quick to learn, but very slow to master. And I think that the point about that is that it's really, you have to learn not only the language of it, but just sort of actually as a person, to embody the values of listening. I mean, it's not easy to do, especially in this world. And it takes time to develop yourself as a mediator. So sure, accreditations are great and everything, and are important for communicating, your development as a mediator and your level, but I think really it's something that takes much longer to develop yourself in than any course can offer. So yeah, you can use mediation to resolve disputes from between neighbors to people who are fighting wars against each other. It's incredibly flexible, and it's a very creative process that participants are actively are encouraged to actively participate in the process, which I find is the beauty of it. Really, it's like you want people to be involved. You want them to be empowered as the mediator. You want people to come and recognize their own responsibility for the situation. And so that's why I think it's fundamentally a much more modern form of dispute resolution, because it's more difficult, I would say, for the parties involved, right? If you have a problem and you say, okay, I'm going to get my lawyer on this, and that's kind of the easy way out, right? I think in our world today, it's more important that we sort of are accountable for our actions. And I think that some actions, getting other people involved and having other people decide what's good for you, sort of is de-empowering and takes empowerment away from people. That's what I wanted to say about mediation. Now, coming on to non-violence here. So yes, I've just come back from India, 2-week tour. It was wonderful experience. I went traveling around with the great Mahatma Gandhi's great grandson, Tushar Gandhi. And I actually know Tushar's father, Arun, as well through my work at Tel Aviv University, and my sort of, my mediation mentor, Dr. Brian Polkinghorne, who's based at Salisbury University in Maryland in the United States, and is executive director of the Bosman Center for Conflict Resolution. So they know each other, and that's how I kind of got introduced to the two of them, descendants of the great Mahatma Gandhi himself. And so I recently went on that trip. But what I want to say here is that, well, first of all, there is a way to practice non-violence, and it's quite simple. I mean, I'm no expert on this, but obviously I understand that it came from South Asian philosophies of ahimsa, and was sort of then developed by Gandhi himself in his struggle for Indian independence and the Satyagraha movement. So it was really wonderful experience traveling around, and I was doing a bit of reading into this, and I sort of discovered that Gandhi himself knew many different languages, not only his native Gujarati, but of course Hindi as well, and other languages as well, like Urdu, and certainly he learned English when he was studying law in London, and also learned French at that time as well. So I think that he spent a lot of time in jail, of course, and he would take those opportunities to improve his language abilities when he had the chance. So I think that there's a fundamental connection between mediation and conflict resolution and language, in that if you are able to communicate with more people, then you're probably a very natural mediator, because you can understand people on certain levels. Yes, of course, it takes effort to cultivate the skills and tools of mediation, but just on a base level, I think understanding different languages is very important. What else is important here in terms of non-violence? I mean, I think that, you know, simplicity is an important concept in Gandhiism, in Gandhian philosophy. But also, you know, I think I need to make it clear that, you know, non-violence is not some sort of passive, you know, practice of just sort of passively accepting, you know, bad situations. I think it a lot of people misinterpret what it actually is. And actually, as well, you can see from the way that Mahatma Gandhi lived his life, of course, you know, making the ultimate sacrifice for non-violence. You know, he was murdered in 1948 for his beliefs, and so actually, you know, non-violence is really a very active philosophy. It's all about putting things into practice, and you know, of course, Gandhi said, "My life is my message." So, if we want to talk about language, I think we can certainly touch upon the you know the you know the philosophy of action, right, and putting things into practice. Now, I wanted to give a few concrete examples. I know I'm like rapidly running out of time here. So I got this from Brian, and you know, his work at Salisbury and Bosman Center. So we teach in our workshop the dirty dozen, high risk responses. So these are things that certainly a mediator shouldn't do, but these are things that you might notice the parties doing at the mediation table. And so just wanted to give a couple of examples of these. You know, these are things that we do very naturally as human beings. So for instance, sending solutions, ordering, you know, stuff like, you must do this, or, you know, go apologize to him or her. Threatening, you had better do this, or else you'd better not try that. Moralizing, it's your duty, I wish you would do this, right? Advising, what I think you should do, it would be best if you did so and so. And then you've got logical arguments. Do you realize that? Let me give you the facts. You've got questioning. Why did you do that? Always be careful of why questions in mediation. What have you done to solve it? Then you've got evaluating. So you've got judging, such things as you're acting foolishly, or that's, you know, that's a stupid thing to say. Praising, you're an intelligent person. You've always made it work in the past. And diagnosing, you're just jealous, you're being a bit paranoid. Name calling, you really messed up on this one, you're a sloppy worker. And finally, the final category, withdrawing. So you've got reassuring, you'll feel different tomorrow, things will get better. And then, of course, you've got diverting. Think about the positive side. You think you've got problems. So if you know, I know I've rushed through that really quickly, but these are things that we as human beings say all the time and very, very automatically. So, you know, I've got lots of examples. You know, one recently with my sister, where we were talking about a letter that a bank sent me, that where it said that I owed them a penny, and I was sent it to my family, and I was like, look at this is crazy. They sent me this letter that says that I owe them a penny. I mean, the piece of paper costs more than a penny, right? I was really upset with the waste that the bank had sort of, you know, had caused. And my sister immediately, her response was, oh, well, you better pay it off. And I was so frustrated by that. I was looking for empathy. I was looking for, you know, sort of, you know, somebody to, you know, sort of recognize my frustration. And immediately my sister, I love my sister so much. I hope she doesn't mind that I've used her as an example in this presentation, but it just shows that people do this so automatically. And so the point here is, if we want to live in a more peaceful world, we have to actually try to develop our ability to use non-violent language, and of course, non-violent communication is a form, a tool developed by Marshall Rosenberg, which obviously is derived from Gandhian philosophy and from South Asian religious traditions as well. So it's kind of been brought into the modern world. Now, I think we're sort of out of time really, but I want to talk a bit about conflict resolution in China. And I'll have to skip this video, which is very funny, but that's okay. So I'll come on.
Only thing with videos, sometimes what happens is, because there are copyright issues, so it's better not to play them in any case. And okay. Mary's not here, so up till she's not here, you can go on, so not a problem at all.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Vikram. So look, I mean, I'll just leave it on this slide for a second, but there were lots of other things I wanted to talk about, how we use language in mediation. So for instance, we can use open and closed questions to get the responses that to sort of guide parties. We can ask, the right question at the right time. Also, we can use the language of collectivism. So, talking about, we, or things when we're talking about what we do, to say I, and then to sort of include people by saying let's do this, or we should do this. Those are easy things as well. As a mediator, you can easily get people to sort of download information onto you, which is very important in the early stages of a mediation, simply by telling them, tell me about this, tell me how this situation made you feel. If you ask somebody an open-ended question like that, they will just they will dump a huge amount of information onto you, which is a very important way to get the information out, and also for the parties to vent their frustration at the start of the process, because of course nobody likes to be involved in a process by which they are being accused of by the other party of doing whatever. As well, there's some great work that has been done on this in this area. So, for instance, there's a British academic called Elizabeth Stokoe, who's sort of done some work on analysing conversations, and she found out, actually through analysing intake calls to mediation service organisations in the UK, that if the person on the other end of the telephone just changed the phrase that they used just a little bit to, let's say, to use the phrase willing, would you be willing, are you willing, that just using that phrase drastically increase the likelihood that the person on the other end of the phone would say, yes, I would be willing to get involved in this mediation process, rather than saying, no, I'm not interested to be involved. So there's some wonderful work that's been done on language and the science of language, and how it actually interacts with the mediation process. This, I just wanted to show this because of course I learned Chinese various different points, and certainly while living in China for a number of years. And so this is the traditional Chinese character. So traditional Chinese characters are used off the mainland. So Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, they use traditional characters rather than simplified, which is what the mainland uses. And I love this, character listen, because I think it gives you a little bit of an insight into how East Asian philosophies sort of consider the concept of listening. So you can see here that this part of the character means ears. This part here, down here in the bottom left, means king or ruler. This up here is 10. It can also mean complete and perfect. This character down in the middle here is eyes. And this dash means one, but it can also mean entire or whole. And then right at the bottom right here, we have the character for heart. So, I personally feel that the idea of listening in the Eastern culture is a much more let's say, involved concept and process than I think we understand it in Western culture. And I think that really, of course, we're talking about language, but listening is a key skill, certainly in mediation, but I think as well in any kind of exchange of dialogue. I mean, certainly another point I wanted to mention here is that cross-cultural mediations that take place between people who come from different cultures, which is basically all the time, but you can have different levels of culture, of course. So we could be talking about national culture or ethnic culture or religious culture and things like that. And the use of interpreters might help you a little bit, but don't forget that the interpreter will most likely put their own cultural interpretation on whatever is being said. And so you might get a translation, a literal translation of what is being said, but there's a lot of meaning that is not transmitted through language. And I'll refer to Elise's presentation where she was talking about nonverbal communication being, what was it, 90 whatever % of all communication. I hope I've understood that statistic correctly. So it's very important when we're talking about language and mediation that we don't just talk about how those sort of simple tools that we can use in our own native language, but we understand about cultural language and non-verbal language as well. Okay, can I go on a little bit?
Yeah, I like that heart part of it and the ting. That's because I keep speaking about that, so I really find it's nice to see that there.
Right, yeah, it's fantastic. Let me just okay, so that your next guest has not come.
Yeah, she's not here, so no issue.
All right, I'll just carry on. I got a few more slides. I've really rushed through it, but anyway. So I want to talk maybe just a bit about mediation as language itself, to kind of like flip it on its head, right? I mean, as I mentioned, as humans, we very naturally fall into quite, I don't want to say violent communication, but let's say, communication that causes a lot of disagreement. And so I think that sort of understanding the principles of mediation, i.e., non-judgment, putting an emphasis on listening, empathy, we can build those concepts into our own language. And actually, so I wanted to mention here that there's a great program on BBC Radio 4 called Across the Red Line, where the host, which I think is Anne McElvoy, has people on, and she also gets mediators to basically sort of mediate a conversation, a dialogue between the two people who disagree on a specific political issue. And she's had Gabrielle Rifkind on, and she's had Louisa Weinstein on as the mediators. And so, this is like using a mediator in an ordinary conversation or a conversation about, political disagreements. This seems to be a little bit of a fringe concept, I would say. I mean, you only have to look at the House of Commons on a Wednesday morning to see two highly, or more than two, but we have in the UK a two-party system essentially, or a government and an opposition. To look at two highly educated people basically shouting at each other and making jokes about each other. Whenever I look at it, I mean, I think that it's very traditional and it's very quaint, and I like it, but is that the best way that political issues can be debated between members of different political organizations? I would say no. And I would say that it's exactly those kinds of conversations that need a mediator, at least one, and I think it'd be better if you had more, to build understanding between people and try to get people on the same page, because we all know that when we hear information and it comes in our brain, the meaning always changes when it hits our brain from the brain that sent it to our brain. We know that for a fact. Everybody will have been in a situation where something that they said was misunderstood, or something that they heard they didn't understand correctly. So I wanted to mention that here, that I think that we've all got work to do if we want to live in a more peaceful world and we want to build more peaceful communities. We've all got a lot of work to do, not only mediators who do this work on on a daily basis and love it, but all of us. We have to be able to communicate in ways in which we are sort of valuing understanding. And I think as well, it means having a slower conversation. I mean, I would say that a mediator could certainly speed things up, right? I mean, just think about any mediator out there, the amount of information that you'll take from a 1-hour meeting, individual meeting with one of the parties, right? So a mediator can speed up this process. But really what I think we have to recognize is that in order to understand each other better, we actually have to slow the process of communication down. And that fundamentally requires a different way of communicating, and a different, a whole different, linguistic toolkit, right? We have to learn the language of understanding, certainly as mediators, but all of us
Ilan, let me
together.
just tell you that
Yeah,
maybe because I put out too many words out there in messages and everything, Mary
yeah.
put down the 21st as her session, which was actually Ken
Oh,
Cloke's session. She put that down there, so she's not coming. You
okay,
have your time, so no issue at all.
okay,
If you want to go back to your slides, any other slide that you did not take enough time on, you can take that time, please.
okay. I might have to do that, but let's go through. I'll kind of I'll finish it off because I'm in this section now. So the other thing that I wanted to mention in this section is something that maybe a lot of mediators know about, but maybe beyond mediators not so well known. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Singapore Convention on Mediation, and it's in this section of mediation as language, because this is a great example of how the world has come together. Some of that information on that slide might be slightly out of date, but has come together to create a language around international, commercial, cross-border business disputes, right? We have it in our capability to formalize ways of communicating so that value can be derived, and cost can be minimized, right? That's a framework that people at UNCITRAL and in the Singaporean Ministry of Law have fixed upon as a means to help companies to resolve disputes across borders. And so I think the point here is that we absolutely have the ability to use mediation as a language to resolve disputes on a mass scale. And what I find is that we aren't going fast enough to using it as a tool, and it still remains a little bit mysterious for many people. And also, as I mentioned before about although it's empowering, you also have the discomfort, I think, of having to sit in front of a mediator and the person that you're in a conflict with. So it's not a comfortable process, but we should put, in my mind, a lot more resources into equipping people with the educational ability. So training people, teaching young people, using peer mediation, and also as well helping mediators to be able to get more opportunities to use their skill set to resolve a whole range of disputes, as I mentioned, from the community to family to businesses and companies to between employees to political rivals to people who were at war with each other. There's so many different areas that we can use this wonderful language of mediation to live in a more peaceful world. Let me come on to my last slide. Just talking about a little bit about the future. So, of course, mediation is constantly evolving, as language does in itself, and so the language of mediation and the language used at mediation is not static and is constantly changing. And so we as mediators need to keep ourselves updated on the latest best practice and insights from both modern practitioners, academics, but also going back and looking, I would say, uh, concepts like ahimsa, and looking at Gandhi and his life, and what he did, the way that he sort of led his non-violent movement for independence from British Empire, which was highly successful. And so, yeah, we need to look back and then sort of be constantly updating our thinking on this. And then, of course, there's this whole issue of, is it voluntary, is it mandatory, or is it something in between? I think that's a big issue for people who are involved in mediation to resolve. And I think that the way that language ties into that is that I think we all need to sort of help each other to come up with some good standardized language, of which I think of course already exists, but we need to come together as mediators and advocates of mediation to explain how mediation can help people in various different ways. And then so I wanted to mention technological developments in mediation. So EEG, electroencephal, I don't know how to say this word, encephalogram, basically, a piece of equipment that that can, sort of read your brainwaves essentially, and that kind of technology I think could be really successfully applied to helping people to get into the space, and also helping a mediator to sort of adjust the language to things that might help people come into that zone of reconciliation and dialogue. So that's important. And then of course I just wanted to mention ChatGPT, because it's all the rage at the moment. I've seen so many posts online talking about how ChatGPT is being used in the justice industry and in the legal industry. So I made that sort of introduction to language and mediation. I just made it through ChatGPT. So that was actually the first time that I've used it. I just wanted to have a little play and figure out what it was all about. So that was my presentation. I guess we can go back and talk about maybe some topics that you want to follow up on. Maybe Vikram, you might want to ask me a little bit about the trip to India, or what I've been up to recently. Just a little bit, a word. That photo is me about a month or two ago at the Gandhi Smriti in Delhi, where Mahatma Gandhi was murdered. So it's a world peace gong that sits just outside of the museum, and I took a photo there in 2010 when I visited the first time, which is my first trip to India. I went with a friend of mine who comes from Indian family, but grew up in the UK, and so I took the sort of same photo 12 years later, or 11 years later, no, 12, maybe even 13. So that's me. So thank you for listening, and maybe we'll rewind and go back to some of the topics.
I think what we'll do is we'll start from the last slide, because Chat GPT and EEG aspect of it. So Chat GPT, definitely what I did was I asked it for a Chinese New Year greeting. And it's because it's the year of the rabbit, and it told me hop over disputes, find peace, something like that. So I put a post out there saying Chat GPT. I said artificial intelligence is greater than natural stupidity. So Chat GPT understands that. But I'm just thinking, look, from the perspective of EEG, and in general, giving a machine access to mediations, and with it, of course, EEG, can we actually make a mediator? Because we say make a mediator, people talk about making mediators in training. Here, if they get access to all that, because that access is not available because it's all confidential, they don't have cameras in there, they're not recording all that. But if that happens, do you think we have lots of mediators in the making?
No, I mean, I didn't mention those to suggest that technology should take over from human mediators. Actually, quite the opposite. I think that, what's great about mediation is that it is inherently or fundamentally a low-tech process of where a human sits between two people who are, have some kind of an issue between themselves. And, funnily enough, I went and did my master's degree at Tel Aviv University in 2013. I made that decision while I was living in China, because I read an article. Well, actually, I read two articles in particular. One was about the coming rise of automation in our lives in general. So, trying to future-proof my career, right? And then, another article was about an organization called the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, which I read that they do sort of, secret back channel negotiations between political groups and paramilitary groups that are in conflict with each other, and sort of they do the work which is very controversial, that if it's out in the open, but that can help us to bring warring parties together. So that was the reason. And that's the great thing about mediation. It's all about the human aspect of it, and recognizing people's vulnerabilities, including the mediator, of course. I mean, it's extremely difficult to mediate a dispute between two or more human beings when you're not able to offer them any advice, or or propose any solutions. I mean, that is really the challenge of it. How do you get people into that space when you are supposedly neutral and impartial? So that's what I love about it. But that's not to say that the mediation process couldn't be aided by certain forms of technology. I mean, that example that I used of the academic, I think she was at Loughborough, but now may have moved on to London School of Economics. Her name is Elizabeth Stokoe, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But so she's done this work on the science of conversations. How do you glean insights from the way that that people communicate with each other. And so what she did was that she loaded telephone calls that where people had called, or maybe the other way around, but basically the intake calls between the staff in the mediation organization and the parties that are involved in the dispute. She had loaded them into a computer. Obviously they were anonymized so that there was no information that could reveal anybody's personal information. But then she analyzed them, the language that people use, the amount of time that was people pauses between words, and at the end of sentences. And so there's so much that we can learn from that. And so technology can help us to take all of that data and crunch all of those numbers, and then come out with some really clear insights, like basically one of them, which you can see from, I think she has a TED talk where she says that, if you just ask people if they'd be willing to do something, they're more likely to say yes, because they want to be seen as somebody who is, a good person, and, willing to sort of recognize their responsibility, and, and work, be, collaborative. So there, the point is that we can use technology to help us, but fundamentally I think that mediation will, while some technology might come into the process, like I've been thinking a lot about the physical and virtual spaces in which mediation takes place. So a physical room where people come to meet, or a virtual room where people come to meet online, because of course, because of COVID, we all started doing that, doing mediations on Zoom and other platforms. So it's those spaces. Could we design those better to have better outcomes, more effective mediations, and more successful mediations? I mean, I would argue certainly we could. If you think about, let's say, mediation that's done at the political level, where you might have a power mediator in the form of, a diplomat, perhaps even a president or a prime minister, potentially. Those kinds of mediations that take place at the high level are often conducted in very comfortable surroundings of, palaces and gardens and, nice food and ambiance and an atmosphere and safety, right? So it's very important that we give as much investment, both of money and effort and time into understanding how mediation can be used to create a more peaceful world. Because certainly you look around at what's going on in the world, and I don't think anybody would argue that we couldn't benefit from greater use and investment in the tools of conflict resolution and certainly and mediation specifically.
Well, but what you said right now, Ilan, has been true for generations. That look what is happening in the world, we could use more of mediation or conflict resolution. For centuries, I think the same thing could have been used. Things don't change, everything will keep, something new will come up, someone will invade someone will be doing something somewhere, and it will continue. We have to change that by going to the grassroots. Let's change the mindset from there. Otherwise, that's why there's one mediation circle. I'm just pushing that part there. But I'm telling you why I'm coming to the technology part of it is because it's not really connected. Is it connected to this symposium? Maybe not, but because we're talking about it, because of the fact that the way mediation itself is perceived, you of course put down what you understand of mediation, and of course you use the word neutral there, and we've had debates on the neutral itself. So I mean, and you do hear of people going in and being told that we'll make you a mediator. So do you connect with people? We were having the last session, Claudia and I were having that discussion about connecting to people, and this is what you're maybe trying to say, that there is a connection between people, the human side of it. But is also mediation being practiced where this is not an element? Because I tell you where the issue lies. The thing is that we might be saying that, okay, I'm like Andrew Miller's, I'm quoting him from the Symposium 2 years back, 18,000 certified mediators in the UK, only 500 have worked. So let's get into that. I was getting into that part of it and getting into the reasons of that. So if you are trying to say we will bring you into a certain room and we'll make you a mediator, are you actually just programming a machine which is not connecting to the whole process, but is being told what to do? So step 1, step 2. So is it better that the machine actually observes the best in the world and learns from them, rather than in a small room, we don't know who's telling you what to do? Yesterday there was some, I mean, of course it was not on record, someone had gone in for a certification in one of these institutions which we know internationally, which is I went there, that person who was sitting there to gauge me or test whatever they were doing did not connect with me. It was such a, I mean, the person, that's not the person I am in terms of my mediation or the way I look at mediation, and I look at the people connected with mediation, but this was like a totally different concept of the person itself. So if this person was the one who was telling people about mediation and even showing them how it's done, I don't know what they do there, but showing them, that's not what this person was. So this would be a disconnect from what you asked, but there is someone else who will pick up from this person. This is what you have to do. So I'm just thinking that, do we need to, maybe it's a good thing, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, maybe it's a good thing to do that, rather program people with the best, rather than saying that someone else will be programming you and we don't know what they're doing with you. Just a thought. That's just a thought. We'll explore this on artificial intelligence and mediation. We'll take that topic up. But the Singapore Convention also, I know that's in a way it's connected to language. The word Singapore's really picked it up. There are people in the world who believe it has something to do with Singapore, not realizing it was just opened for signature in Singapore. That's why it's called the Singapore Convention. Singapore has, okay, they were actively involved in The process, damn good. That's a back end work that they were doing. But some people actually believe this has something to do with Singapore. Something is happening there in relation to mediation. So this is how they've picked a word and made that convention their convention.
Yeah,
Which I have to
very.
clarify on my website when I write Singapore Convention. It is known as Singapore Convention only because it was opened for signature in Singapore. So
Right.
sometimes people pick up words and they make it theirs, and people really believe that yes, this is them. But
Mm.
yeah, you're saying something.
Well, yeah. So I think it's a very smart move on the part of the Singaporean Ministry of Law. That's for sure. Because I think there's good argument to be made for Singapore being a natural hub of commercial cross-border mediation, because they have a well-developed legal industry, and they're sort of ethnically Chinese, but sort of independent nation, of course, and sort of like a blend of Western and Eastern cultures and philosophies. So yeah, I think it's a great move by Singapore, and maybe there's some good reasons underpinning it, but of course it's a global and international treaty that many different countries have signed up to. So yeah, I mean, I think that we can use that concept to broaden out. It doesn't just have to be commercial disputes. I mean, it can be disputes, sort of international disputes of any kind. So yeah, that's what I was thinking about that.
Yeah, because I think the point was that this will in some way activate countries to be looking at legislation.
Yeah.
And from there, at least the word goes out that, okay, there is something called mediation. The word, because thing is that within the mediation world, we will talk about it, but does the user even get to know what's happening there? Because I know from the Indian example, and I keep talking about it, we have the best law on mediation. Only thing is called conciliation. So the judiciary, the lawyers, even mediators, they say we don't have a law on mediation, and I'm saying we have the best law on mediation. Go into the history of it. So I
Right.
think this is where the word by itself is a problem for me. I think actually, which is what we did in that symposium on mediation in a culture and tradition. Let's
Mm.
connect people to the process. I think this
Yeah.
word part of it has taken it in different direction. Even the fact that, like you were also using parties and table, mediation table, and all those
Mm.
things.
Mm.
And I've gone out and said, look, to all participants, coming from someone in the World Mediators Conference, she was part of this whole community mediation in the US, and she said we don't use parties because it's come from the court system. We say participants. So I've picked that up and I've really started pushing that. And of course, in terms of opening statement, it says, oh, it's a very court-related terminology. So she
Yeah.
says we use orientation. So whatever, I mean, language in that sense, even the user, to connect to the user also, we've created language which creates a division. So
Mm.
parties, you're still bringing that aspect, but I think opening it out to participants make them feel more part of the process. So I think that change in the thought process of the mediators to pass that on to the participants, I think that's the language part of it. There also
Mm.
is important. The table part of it, I've been saying, there was this book I contributed to. The chapter is bringing people under the tree. So the idea being, let's,
Mm.
because look, finally you've been to India, and I was just talking to you about that. You can
Mm.
understand that we have a billion people in villages in India, a billion
Mm.
people. You can't
Mm.
even imagine that. I mean, you can add
Mm.
all these countries, you can add the UK and the US and France and everyone together, you still won't make a billion people. We're
Mm.
sitting in villages. Connect them to something that they understand. That let's try and understand that part. The other part of it, like you said, Singapore being a hub, and commercial mediation and all that gets pushed, and
Mm.
even legislation countries are looking at it from that perspective. But
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
go into Singapore and you find out in terms of the numbers, in terms of cases that are handled by these mediation centers, you'll be amazed. In 1997, I think Singapore Mediation Center would have handled some 5,000 matters.
Mm.
We are talking about our courts having 50 million matters lying there.
Yeah.
I think
Right.
there's a whole disconnect of this mediation world that's being created with
Mm.
this whole training and certifications and ground reality.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
language part of it playing a role to connect it. First of all, I think how I'm just bringing it in because this is language and mediation. There are
Yeah.
so many other factors there, but I think we are pushing it from an angle where, yes, it will serve the purpose of some people, which includes the judiciary, but
Yeah.
not serve mediation itself. Your
Yeah.
thoughts on
Yeah.
that, Ilan? Your thoughts?
Well, you know, for me, as I mentioned at the start, mediation comes from this sort of much broader concept of conflict resolution. And somehow in the development of human, humankind, we've come to this point where conflicts and disputes are resolved in things called courts, which are, themselves probably, yeah, sure. I mean, they've been developing for a long time, and of course, the concept of law. I mean, it's something so fundamental to the societies that we live in, right? I mean, government makes law, and the judiciary, judge, the implementation of it, and the police enforce it. I would say that conflict resolution and even mediation is really above all of that. It sits on top of it. Dispute resolution is a piece of conflict resolution, and mediation, I suppose, can be within dispute resolution. It's if it's sort of formal disputes, or outside of dispute resolution, if it's kind of, if it doesn't touch national or even international law. Human beings interacting with each other, right? Like disputes and disagreements and conflict must be as old as humankind itself, and therefore the process of resolving conflicts and disputes and disagreements is also as old as humankind itself, and therefore we should be looking more, I think, to beyond law. And of course, I would say this because I'm not a lawyer and I didn't study law, so I would say that. But I really do genuinely believe it, and I'm sure that there's lots of lawyers who believe it as well. I mean, laws are important, but they change, so we can't judge everything, and we probably shouldn't judge much. Even we should almost like flip it on its head. Like, I think that we certainly live in a time of people saying what they want, so concept of free speech, judging people, that's something, as I mentioned, we do very, very naturally. Or it doesn't have to be judging, it can be one of the other 12, as I outlined in the Dirty Dozen, right? Just automatic human responses, because we've all been socialized by the societies that we've grown up in. And I think we need to constantly remind ourselves that we don't have to be like that. We can communicate and interact with each other in very different ways, and I would say much more productive ways than the wastage, right? I mean, if you think about nonviolence, I mean, Gandhi was very clear about waste in society, and it's something that we need to look at. So, it's not just what we throw away, right? It's also time. We can't get this time back, unfortunately. I mean, for us living on this earth, I mean, maybe the concept of time itself is almost infinite, but we can't get this time back, and therefore that's why we need to think a bit more broadly about how we go about this. And actually, maybe I just want to say one more thing on this, which is that one of the other points I wanted to mention about Gandhi and his philosophy, and the active nature of it, is that it doesn't help to avoid conflict or to accommodate people in a conflict situation. And I think Gandhi proved that by the way that he lived his life. He didn't shy away from conflict. I mean, it kind of, he sort of, he was very much involved in lots of different conflict situations. And something that came through some of the things that I was reading about Gandhi and his life is that, having difficult conversations is crucial, is essential to to building relationships with people, right? Because we're different, we have different interests, we have different situations that we grow up in, and so we can't, you can't just sort of pretend that conflict isn't there. And so I think that the way in which we've set up our societies doesn't really get to the underlying root of conflicts between people, but just sort of like looks at them through various different lenses of, domestic or international laws. I mean, we need to be looking above that and looking at what are the needs of people and how can mediation serve the needs of people. I personally feel mediation can serve the needs of people far more effectively than, I would say, the vast majority of other dispute resolution processes. I mean, of course, some of the different ways, like litigation, arbitration, conciliation, negotiation, they might be more appropriate in various different situations. But let's say even with violent crime, we can look at a process of restorative justice based on a case-by-case basis, because again, we have to live in a society which is safe, both psychologically and physically, for people. So if there is situations where, where people are not safe psychologically and physically, then we need to step in to protect people. And so, restorative justice wouldn't be appropriate there, and mediation might not be appropriate there, right? But let me just give you an example here. I mean, I know that, and I think you know as well, Vikram, that there's a police force in the United States, probably not the only one, that has employed mediators, or maybe it's not a police force, maybe it's a kind of like the local, government or whatever. They've employed mediators to go out and to intervene in conflict situations. So you don't send a man or a woman with a gun. You send a mediator, male or female, who is armed with the tools of conflict resolution, right? And I think that, certainly looking from a US perspective and the issues that they're experiencing with, sort of, violence in society, that would be highly beneficial if we invested in the skills of people. I would say, certainly go across the board, people in kids in schools, young people, training in various different areas, and adults who want to, like me, basically. I sort of pivoted my career to studying conflict resolution, from a background of finance and government and whatever else. That people who we should be invested in. I mean, I'm making a plea for whoever is listening to this. Any connections that you have in government and civil society and business, make the case for investment in mediators, people who love this work and who want to do this work. It's not easy, right? It's not easy to sit between people who don't want to look at each other, or who shout at each other, or who might even be physically violent towards each other. It's not easy to insert yourself into that situation. It takes a lot of nuance and patience and skill. And I personally feel that if we want to live in a more peaceful world, we have to start investing in peacemakers. And that means giving people who've made the decision to study mediation and yeah, sure, to take the chance and the risk that they won't be able to make a living from it. That we need to appreciate that on a societal level. So I think maybe I've gone off on a tangent and in response to the
now that you've all gone into the tangent, I'm going to carry on there, because the idea behind the World Mediation Circle is that, because look, the governments let them do what they're doing because they have their agenda, whatever. I'm sure they have good intentions.
Yeah.
Let that happen, but things have not changed for mediators. And you said that, okay, in terms of look, livelihood is important, and let's value them, and they should be paid,
Mm.
that has to happen. So create that environment with the communities itself, work directly with them. We don't
Mm.
need anyone else in between. But this thing that you're talking about, the Dayton Mediation Center has tied up, I think,
Yes,
with the
that's right.
police there. But
Yes.
what is really happening is you going back to what communities were supposed to be. You were supposed to, you had, I'm not supposed to, you had people like that. You called those
Yeah.
people. But then the colonizer came, and colonizer created the police structure, the court structure, because it
Mm.
served their purpose. So
Mm.
now to get, we had that symposium. You've been out, you've been busy, you have been participating, but we had a symposium
Mm.
on colonization, decolonization, and mediation to discuss these issues. Because
Right.
to actually take that whole mindset to change things over hundreds of years that has been put into you, that you have to call the police, you have to
Mm.
go to courts. So I've been saying that when we reach that point, when first of all, from the structure itself, the laws and the process and
Mm.
even the jails, when you can change all that, where going, I'll call the police and I'll send you to jail, is not a threat that worries anyone. Today it worries someone because the colonizers jails is what you've kept. Why
Mm.
should an innocent person be sent into that structure? Is because
Mm.
the colonizer could send it, and we've accepted that. You
Mm.
are innocent. You keep saying criminal justice system, innocent up till proven guilty. You sent
Mm.
an innocent person into something which you would send an animal to. You've put
Mm.
them in a cage. So to be able to get out of that mindset, which is accepted so casually, it
Yeah.
is a total violation of someone's human rights, because you said one judge you went to, and prima facie the person said yes, this person is guilty. Then what have you done? You've just gone through a whole process of actually convicting someone without saying we're convicting you.
Mm.
So that
Mm.
whole thing has to change. You work on that. That those are
Yeah.
things people, these governments and judiciary have to work on. Instead of going there, they found mediation to be a route very easy. That okay, we'll send you to mediation. Okay, that's not,
Mm.
because you've
Mhm.
given mediation a different color altogether, which was not supposed to be. So I think this part of it, what you were saying, I think
Mm.
communities itself first of all have to be brought together, because those
Yeah.
themselves have broken down. And that is why, like I said, the divide and rule the colonizer brought in was something that has got passed down. And that's the way politics works. That's the
Mm.
way it has been functioning. And that's the way, look, I can't say about UK because I don't have those statistics. And you are kind of a two-party system. But let's look at, I mean, even a two-party system in the US. I don't have your statistics, but let's look
Mm.
at the US. 33% of the votes of the country, entire votes of the country, you get only 33% and you form the government or you become the
Mm.
president.
Yeah.
37% of the people in that country don't vote, but you are still their representative in that sense. You're taking decisions for them. So that is because you could divide and rule. So those are
Mm.
lots of factors which come in. So let's just let that happen. It's going to keep happening. There's a lot of vested interest, like I said there. But let's go
Mm.
down to communities. One, they might be, the mediators might have the role to actually bring communities together. That's one
Mhm.
part. To be able to have this whole concept that okay, we have this, let's call a mediator. When that happens, that's the day I will say, yes, we are going in the right direction. Yesterday, we
Mm.
were talking about even in cases of tourists, when they go to places, if they have an issue there, there should be a mediator they can call. Even the tourist departments and everyone should be working on that, because someone is coming to a country, doesn't know the law, it doesn't know anything what's happening there, and you don't have time also. So you should have a mediator available on call. Same thing, like you said, in issues in communities which are not those sort when someone has to be restrained. It is just
Mm.
a community, whatever, neighbor just arguing with with themselves. But at least you can call someone. So I think that
Mm.
person is not available, has not been available because of the structures, the way they were created. So what we are doing is, it's a huge job to actually first that mindset that no, you don't go there, you go here, you have an individual. So first identifying those individuals. And
Mm.
for me, those individuals, I'm saying, exist, they're all out there. They've just been wrapped up and put aside because this other structure took over. So we have
Mm.
to bring those people out, then valuing those people, then those people being able to create this as their livelihood, because we need them to do a lot of this. Of course, mediations is one part, but then the larger role of mediators in in communities, in society, in the world in general, there is more than just mediations. facilitating conversations in various ways. There could be local issues which are happening where you can be part of that. You're creating a community. What is these circles that I'm creating? It's a community which believes that they can have conversations, dialogue, and have an objective view on issues. On the other side, politics, advocacy, activism, they exist on the other side. This part doesn't exist. I'm saying so. I'm sure it exists. There must be people doing it. I'm saying on a much larger scale, it doesn't exist because there are vested interests which come into advocacy groups, in activists. Politics, of course, is on that side. So to be able to get these people who have a mediator mindset, when I say mediator mindset, all this comes into play. A person who doesn't even fall into this vested interest trap is actually going to be a lot of course, there'll be lots of things that a person like that has. To even list them out, we won't be able to put it out there. But I know what I'm talking about, and I know Ilan knows what I'm talking about. A person with a mediator mindset brings certain aspects to it. So we're just identifying those people, bringing them out. We're not training, because actually what is happening, and that's become an industry by itself. And that industry is now to a certain extent going to control legislation also, because I know India, of course, is drafting a mediation bill, and I know the training institutions have got into that drafting, because finally, if you make a training mandatory in a country of 1.4 billion people, you've done it. What else do you want? You've created something for yourself for life. So it's gone in that direction, and I can only point it out. I pointed it out, but I am, of course, a minority in the world. Forget India, I'm a minority in the world, but I have to keep saying what I'm saying. There might be radical views. I keep saying dispute resolution, revolution, but I can't help it because I see where it's going. I know in that direction what is the situation. I told you about Singapore. People say commercial mediation and hub and anything. Numbers are nothing. Mediators also are told that they will become mediators. They'll get into this accreditation kind of route. Nothing comes to them. So I mean, in that world, let's just let it be where it's going. But on this end, I know Ilan is on this side. So Ilan is going to work with me on this other side, where we can actually create things from the grassroots. And I think your India experience definitely, I'm sure you've seen what is happening in India today is we are talking about India and we say Bharat. Bharat is the Hindi word for India. And this is there are two Indias there. The India as we know it, which is of course the cities and the development, you've seen that also, and the Bharat, which is still living in villages.
Right.
So I am saying let's look at Bharat. Let's develop that. Maybe today it might be a little easier. Maybe communities are still exist. I'm not saying that it's true everywhere, that the politics has broken things down everywhere. But let's see if we can maybe get a better hold into those areas. India, I don't want it to go in this direction, but it seems that the way legislations are happening, it might go into this direction. And I'm saying there might be the similar thing in other parts of the world, because UK example is available to me. I get so many messages of how disillusioned mediators have been there. They've gone out, and these are people with a mediator mindset. They moved out. They just got disillusioned. They said, this is not happening. They were sold dreams. And nothing happened there. So UK, I know, US also, things. I mean, what we call mature markets are not. It hasn't really happened. It's not the first call that you make. So we have to create that person available first of all. No use saying it should be the first call if you don't have the right person they're speaking to. So let's do that. So that's the idea behind all that.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah, I'd love to be involved. I think it's great to focus on people who live, in sort of, smaller communities and perhaps more rural communities. Actually, that was a lot of, my trip to India recently was very much focused on that, which, as you would expect of a Gandhi legacy tour, it was focused on people, let's say, who need help in society, people marginalized communities, migrant workers, women and girls, people who have disabilities, and everything like that. So yeah, I think that it's a great idea, and certainly, I mean, obviously my background as a community mediator. That is where most of my mediation experience has come since 2018. And I find that work very rewarding spiritually, to be able to help people who are in terrible situations with either their neighbor or other parties in participants in in society. It's incredibly satisfying to be able to help people. The only issue is, of course, is that I can't support myself doing that work. Unfortunately, I do it in my spare time. I do it in evenings and on weekends, and yeah, I mean, that is the tragedy of it, is that, community mediators are providing such great service and value to society that is probably hard to quantify. I guess maybe that's like one of the issues of it. It's like, how do you quantify but we shouldn't have to quantify everything in society. We should just recognize the fundamental value of helping people to live with their neighbor or a family member or a friend or a business partner in more peace and a more productive relationship. So yeah, I think that it's something that is a great way to focus. And I certainly would, very grateful to you, Vikram, for creating the mediation circles. And yeah, certainly looking forward to getting involved and learning more about it, and adding my, time and energy and skills to the project, because or the initiative, because as I said, Gandhian philosophy is all about action. It's all about doing things rather than constantly talking about things. And I think that's what people misunderstand about non-violent resistance, that it is very active in that element of resisting things that are bad for society. And so if we all came together and collaborated to send a message to those people who are in charge that we want to do things in a different way, in a way in which is more understanding, and more patient, and more kind and compassionate, that we would all of a sudden immediately we would be living in more peaceful world and society and communities, right? So yeah, I mean, I'm still very optimistic about it, and it's very exciting, certainly, to be involved in this development of mediation as a tool of dispute resolution. It's very exciting. Yeah.
No, but I'm just saying that we have to be very careful that the same people who are creating that divisive society, if you bring them in, you've actually gone against the whole idea behind it. So let's just keep them away. Now we have to make sure we keep them away, because on the other end, there are people who understand, they want to connect, and all that is available. But bringing them in, these people in, is only going to maybe take it into the wrong direction again. So we're not going to bring them in. We're not going to bring anyone. We'll create communities. We don't need anyone's support. People are going, even mediators, I've kind of created some structure there. The mediators are going to earn out of it. They're going to be paid. It's not, we've done our free activity. We've done enough of that. So we'll create that. But tell me something now. Are you ready for a discussion on Mahatma Gandhi and mediation? Because I had two discussions. I've had two discussions in a part of that. Now, what happened was that after 2 hours, we came to the point when we should have actually, the discussion should have really started from there, which is, was Mahatma Gandhi a mediator? Okay. So now, are you prepared now? Have you learned enough about what he was doing to be able to discuss that topic? Because for me, it's a topic which needs a lot of discussion. Let's not take it on face value and very easily say that Mahatma Gandhi was a mediator and just leave it at that. We need to get into it. So are you now prepared for such a discussion?
Not now.
Not now. In the sense, have you now, over this whole tour of your, been able to?
I mean, look, I've still got a ton of reading to do, and I haven't been able to do half as much as I would have liked since I came back from India in mid-January, because I have a job and don't have other things going on as well. Like I'm actually moving out of this apartment in about 10 days, so things are life is sort of gets in the way of these kind of things. So no, but I would love to be involved in such a discussion, and hopefully, if it's sometime in the future, I can do some reading that would that would add some context and some color to that discussion. So yeah, I would love to be involved, but no, not right now.
No, I'm saying what you do is have a look at those two discussions. I mean,
Yeah,
listen to them. You can just search Mediator Vikram and Mahatma Gandhi. You'll find those videos. Have a look at that, because that discussion has to continue. It was,
yeah,
according to me, it hasn't. There's lots more to be discussed there. But the
yeah.
other aspect of our on the phone when we were talking about that village Swaraj, the self-sufficiency of villages, I'm telling you,
Yes.
that was a concept much before its time. Today we're talking about sustainability and all those things, and those were things that a lot of it can be taken care of right there. Even just the
Mm,
fact of khadi itself. Khadi
yeah.
itself, I mean, today we're
Right.
talking about clothes, what they're doing to the environment, and all the dyes, and of course the clothes which get left don't get sold, and they throw there, and
Mm,
all those things. Today, those companies are also getting active. But on the other end, he was talking about that. So please study that, Ilan.
yeah.
Because you know me, I don't, I don't end up reading, but please study it and that part of it, because a
Yeah.
part of these circles is obviously a climate change mediation circle. That's
Yeah.
the global one, and then down to every community. So
Mm,
how these kinds of things, thoughts which people have had, and how we can use them and look at things differently at the community level also. So I think, because he did,
yeah.
there are a lot of things that he said were much before their time,
Yeah.
and I think we should be able to look at it, and but on an objective way. I mean, I'm not saying because Mahatma Gandhi wrote it, so we have to accept it. I'm not. We don't
Yeah.
have to do that.
Yeah. No,
But
sure, sure.
and of course, certain things might have changed over time. His thoughts about some things, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
because he also kept writing a lot of things over time, so now his thoughts also might have changed. Now, what point do
Yeah.
you pick up things from? Because so that's why there's a
Right.
lot of lots that you have to do, and you have to identify the right Gandhians to speak to, who have
Yes.
actually not just taken as, oh, Mahatma Gandhi. No, they actually read, and they've read it all throughout, and finally, what were the thoughts that came out at a point when things had in his mind also developed a lot more with
Mm.
experience and other things. So we need some good Gandhians also. I hope you've identified some.
Yeah, okay, okay. Let me work on that. I regret now that I didn't wear my caddy shirt that I bought at the Sevagram ashram with when we were there with Tushar in early January. So I or maybe it was even late December. So I regret that I did. But I think it's a wonderful example. And actually maybe if I could just because I do have to go in a minute, but if I could just sort of give everybody an example of the type of thing that Gandhi would do. So of course he led that campaign of self reliance, which was causing problems. And of course, he encouraged Indians, as far as my probably very basic understanding of what happened, to spin their own cotton and make their own garments, and therefore have to rely less on imported manufactured garments from British textile factories or textile mills. And so I think in the 1930s, maybe early 30s, when this was going on, the British government invited him, because obviously he was already, quite a sort of figurehead of the Indian people and spiritual leader of the Indian people by then. They invited him over to the UK to talk about this issue and the friction that it had caused with the British textile mill workers who were losing business because the Indians were now sort of making their own clothes and other materials. And they were going to put him up in a really fancy hotel in London, and he said, "No, no, no! I want to stay with the textile mill workers. I want to see their lives. I want to know what my actions have done to their lives." And the government said to him, "You must be crazy. They'll kill you. They'll lynch you, based on you've taken all of this business away from them." And he said, "Well, if that's what happens, that's what happens. I need to go. I need to make the effort to go and understand them and their pains and their struggles, and also to explain about what was happening in India, or what was happening in India at that time. So he had to go and do that. So he was always surprising people with his ideas, because he would operate in a way that was incredibly counterintuitive to the way that we usually try to resolve conflict in the world. And that's why he became, I think, such a incredible role model of nonviolence and sort of conflict resolution, because he just did things in a way in which he wanted to understand, he wanted to learn about other people all the time. And of course, lots of people didn't appreciate that about him, but I certainly think that it was wonderful that he did that. So yeah, I mean, there's another example as well that I read in his grandson's book, The Gift of Anger by Arun Gandhi, and where he tried to move to South Africa with his wife Kasturba, and they were denied, because obviously in the South African system of apartheid, people from Indian ethnicity were not wanted in South Africa at the time, and so they denied him. And then when he was in Mumbai, he came across a South African minister in the government, and he was overcome with this emotion. He was angry when he saw this guy, and he wanted to throw him off the boat, but he calmed down, and he decided not to throw him off the boat. And he went over to him, and he shook his hand, and he introduced himself, and he got to know each other. And in the end, that person working for the South African government went back to South Africa and became an advocate for ending the system of apartheid. So you see that if we take different ways of approaching conflicts and problems, and if we take a longer view and a more nuanced view and a more compassionate view, where we understand people and the reasons that they do things, not to justify what they do, but just purely to understand why people behave in certain ways. If we do that, we can often have much greater outcomes for ourselves and for wider society as a whole, rather than just taking revenge against somebody who you feel angry towards. So yeah, there's some stories that I learned on the trip and through reading Arun's book, The Gift of Anger. So it's a wonderful book if
So now
people
you
have
have to
not read
leave.
that.
So a little
Yes.
concluding
Yeah.
statement, whatever you want to, because there's lots to discuss. So definitely we'll continue
Yeah.
conversations. Yeah. So yes.
Sure. Well, what should I say? Look, I think this is a wonderful event. I mean, language and mediation, it's so fundamental. I mean, we talk about the language mediators use, the language that the people, the participants to a mediation use, how we can improve all of our language on, not just mediators, but everybody in society. It's wonderful, fulfilling work that I think we owe it to ourselves and to our families and to our friends and our colleagues and even the people we don't disagree with. I think probably we mostly owe it to those people in order to be able to, to coexist and to coexist and exist on this planet together, because it is really critical and urgent work that all of us, both mediators and non-mediators alike, should be invested in, financially, spiritually, emotionally. We must come together and work together to build better and fairer and more peaceful communities and societies, and therefore a world as a whole. And just as a final note, I obviously just wanted to say thanks so much to you, Vikram, for creating this wonderful symposium and all of the events that you've created, which, sadly, I haven't had as much time as I would have liked in the last, couple of years to get involved in. But, I'm glad that you invited me to this event, and really honored to, be one of the speakers at this symposium. And obviously look forward to working with you. And certainly I'm also going to be supporting the work that you're doing. I know that I haven't done that yet, but I really appreciate what you're doing, and I will make a gesture to recognize the incredible effort that you've put into bringing mediators together. For instance, Elyse, she gave that great talk. I met her through this symposium, right? So you must have connected more mediators together and non-mediators to mediators than probably anybody else on the planet. So thank you so much for that, and it's been a pleasure. And I look forward to watching the rest of the symposium and watching the recordings. So yeah, really appreciate what you've done, Vikram.
And 21st, of course, last day, learnings and key takeaways and Ken's session. So please come in. And I'm really happy that people connect. And now we've all connected. I'm sure lots of people are connected. Now let's work on the ground. Let's get some change going on the ground. So, Ilan, thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks so much.